Okay, this is from joyito.com announcing the MIT Media Lab Digital Currency Initiative from 2015. As Bitcoin continues to gain momentum and capture the interest of entrepreneurs, hackers, businesses, policymakers, and academics, we have decided to launch an initiative at the MIT Media Lab with participation from faculty and students from across the institute, focusing on Bitcoin and more generally cryptocurrencies. This is Joy Ito's page on the MIT Media Lab website. He's also involved in the Space Exploration Initiative, aside from actually creating the Digital Currency Initiative. And when you go through his bio, he is connected in many different ways. Chairman of the board of PureTech Health, previously the board chair and chief executive of Creative Commons. He has served on other boards, New York Times, Sony, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, ICANN, Mozilla, Open Source Initiative. This guy is everywhere. Obviously a connected individual. So you will be just as amazed as I was when I learned that Joy Ito was forced to resign from the MIT Media Lab as its director. The director of the MIT Media Lab and creator of the Digital Currency Initiative, remember, Joy Ito resigned Saturday amid a scandal over the Media Lab's ties to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The New Yorker report says Epstein helped secure donations from parties including Microsoft founder Bill Gates, and that the lab's cover-up effort was an open secret among staff, some of whom gave Epstein the nickname Voldemort, or he who must not be named. So even the people in the lab knew what was going on. They just said it under their breath in code when no one was looking, right? The Media Lab has been under scrutiny for its ties to Epstein, who last month committed suicide in jail. Well, that's debatable, while facing federal sex trafficking charges. In late August, Ethan Zuckerman, director of the Center for Civic Media at MIT and an associate professor at the MIT Media Lab, said he was moving his work out of the Media Lab due to its ties with Epstein. Shortly after those departure announcements, the Media Lab said in a statement that MIT had received around $800,000 in donations from Epstein over 20 years. This week, Ito acknowledged taking $525,000 from Epstein for the Media Lab, as well as a $1.2 million contribution for his personal investment funds, according to the New York Times. Now, we really have to stop and take a breath here and think about what is actually going on. Everybody knows who Jeffrey Epstein was. Everybody knows what they were doing on that island. So everyone knows the network that Epstein was connected into. Meaning, if you are the head of the MIT Media Lab and you are getting a personal $1.2 million contribution, loan, however they sell it, from Jeffrey Epstein, you are in the club. It's that big club that you aren't in. Well, Joy Ito was in the club if he's getting money from Jeffrey Epstein. So taking all of that into account, we're talking about the guy who started the Digital Currency Initiative being connected to Jeffrey Epstein, which was designed to promote and further study Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And why does that matter? Well, many of the key players in the early Bitcoin development scene went to work for the Digital Currency Initiative at MIT. And then many of those individuals, as we'll get into, went to work directly for the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston to develop the code and the underlying infrastructure that will eventually make up the United States government's central bank digital currency. In other words, now we're getting into territory where we have to ask the question, were these people just regular coders and software engineers who became intrigued by Bitcoin and started working on it? Surely there was some of that going on. But then for the key players, we have to ask the question, were these planted individuals who were always later going to go on to be central figures in the development of the government version of it. And in this way, like they do for similar operations, these people establish credibility in the scene, which establishes their plausible backstory when they write about it later in the history books, as they try to sell the new version to the mainstream population of whatever it is that they're creating. The New Yorker report, which cites internal MIT records and information from present and former Media Lab faculty and staff, says Epstein secured at least $7.5 million in lab donations, including $2 million from Gates and $5.5 million from investor Leon Black, founder of private equity firm Apollo Global Management. The report also says that although Epstein was listed as disqualified in MIT's official donor database, the Media Lab continued to accept gifts from him, consulted him about the use of the funds, and by marking his contributions as anonymous, avoided disclosing their full extent, both publicly and within the university. A spokesperson for Gates told The New Yorker that any claim that Epstein directed any programmatic or personal grant-making for Bill Gates is completely false. Gates Philanthropic Foundation didn't respond to CNET's request for comment. So, of course, Bill Gates is denying that he would have directed Epstein to donate money on his behalf, because in the aftermath of everything that went down, Bill Gates has gone to a great length in distancing himself from Jeffrey Epstein. And there are hilarious interviews that he has given where he was sort of pressed on this and just he flails his arms around and gets all nervous and says something like, well, we met for dinner because you just know people like this, and sometimes you eat with them. And it was some ridiculous quote he gave, but clearly the MIT Media Lab is connected with all the usual suspects. And again, here we have the head of the Media Lab and the creator of the Digital Currency Initiative directly accepting money from Jeffrey Epstein and doing it in a very shady way, which of course will give them plausible deniability, MIT that is, that we did not know this was happening and we did not sanction it. Right, here is Leon Black doing the same usual PR strategy, saying his dealings with Epstein were for the most part limited to estate planning, philanthropic advice, and tax strategy. Apollo has never done business with Epstein, and Black was unaware of the conduct alleged in the federal charges against Epstein. Of course, none of them knew. Okay. Ito established the Digital Currency Initiative at MIT, helping Bitcoin survive some of its darkest days in 2015. That year, when the Bitcoin Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to the cryptocurrency's development, faced funding constraints, the DCI welcomed Bitcoin core developers Gavin Andreessen, Corey Fields, and Vladimir Vanderlaan in full-time roles. So the Digital Currency Initiative, started by Joy Ito, who was receiving funding from Jeffrey Epstein and had this personal relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, brings in a lot of the well-known Bitcoin core developers into the DCI at a time when Bitcoin was struggling, because 2015 was a little bit after the Mt. Gox hack, and there was a lot of negative press about Bitcoin, and so they kind of reformatted its image as digital gold, moving it away from the peer-to-peer cash idea that was in the original white paper. They've kind of rebranded it as digital gold, a store of value. And this was the beginning of that process in 2015. And 2 years later, in 2017, is when they artificially boosted the price for the first time up to almost $30K. Since then, other members of DCI have left to work on Facebook's Libra, and prominent contributors have created their own cryptos. Associate Professor Christian Catalini, a principal investigator in MIT's Digital Currencies Research Study, is now head economist for Calibra, Facebook's crypto wallet. And Professor Silvio Micali has since founded Algorand, a digital currency with a lottery-based consensus algorithm. And of course, Algorand is listed in the World Economic Forum's cryptocurrency research project as one of the ISO compliant cryptos that will have a future. We can see what's going on here. We have all these connections to all the usual suspects coming out of the Digital Currency Initiative. This is from CoinDesk. Just getting a little bit further into Bill Gates and Epstein and the DCI. When Gates made a $2 million contribution, Peter Cohen, the lab's then director of development and strategy, reportedly said in an MIT email, "This is a $2 million gift from Bill Gates, directed by Jeffrey Epstein for gift recording purposes. We will not be mentioning Jeffrey's name as the impetus for this gift." And then again, Gates denied that Epstein had a role in directing any of that funding. So let's look into Neha Narula, who is the current head of the Digital Currency Initiative. Narula is the director of the Digital Currency Initiative, a part of the MIT Media Lab focusing on cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology. While completing a PhD in computer science at MIT, she built fast, scalable distributed systems and databases. She is a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Futures Council on Blockchain. So this is the current head of the Digital Currency Initiative. And when you go to the actual white paper for Project Hamilton from the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, we can see that Neha Narula is one of the names listed here, along with Corey Fields, Anders Brownworth, James Lovejoy, and some other people that were involved in early Bitcoin development. Now, one of the names not listed here, because he has since left these projects, is Gavin Andresen. And Gavin Andresen is interesting because this is his Wikipedia page. After joining the developers contributing to Bitcoin along with Satoshi Nakamoto, he went on to become lead developer of the client software for the Bitcoin network. And the story here is that after Satoshi, quote unquote, which of course is the government, after Satoshi left Bitcoin, the entity behind that name handpicked Gavin Andresen to become the lead developer for the Bitcoin network. And then Gavin Andresen went directly to the Digital Currency Initiative at MIT. This is from his Twitter explaining why he left the Digital Currency Initiative. And there's all kinds of weird stories about how he said that Satoshi was Craig Wright, and then he got his privileges revoked from the GitHub, and then he left the DCI. So there's something going on there, but I'm not really concerned with any of that. I'm just concerned with the fact that this is the guy who was picked to lead the future of Bitcoin after Satoshi stepped back, after the government released it into the wild, and they stayed anonymous and then stepped back and let quote-unquote real people take it over, who would then promote it to the world and try to mainstream it. Well, the guy who was picked to lead that, he went to work at the Digital Currency Initiative, which was started by Joi Ito, and as we've gone into, had the ties to Epstein and Bill Gates and all these other usual suspects. Now, maybe Gavin Andresen actually is just a regular software engineer who was involved in Silicon Valley, went to Princeton, and just became very interested in it. And as a result of that interest, he ended up being the lead developer after Satoshi let it go. It could be that, but we also have to entertain the other end of the spectrum, which would be something along the lines of, and again, this is just hypothetical, but perhaps he was chosen for that role ahead of time. That was always going to be his role. And then they sort of sacrificed his credibility in order to reinforce the idea in the minds of everyone paying attention to Bitcoin that it was an actual real person and not the government who put it out into the open first. Meaning his story that it was actually Craig Wright who was Satoshi was designed to do that, and they knew there would be backlash in the community from that, and then they sort of repositioned him as a supporter of Bitcoin Cash and repositioned him away from the DCI to serve that purpose. I don't know. It could be any of those possibilities or somewhere in between. For example, maybe he started out as a legitimate, ordinary person, and then eventually they made an offer to him that he couldn't refuse, as it were. It could be anywhere in between, like I said. Now, this is a really interesting article from the Harvard Business Review. The blockchain will do to the financial system what the internet did to media. And this is by Joy Ito and Neha Narula from March of 2017. And they say something really interesting down here. We might best understand Bitcoin as a microcosm of how a new, decentralized, and automated financial system could work. While its current capabilities are still limited, for example, there's a low transaction volume when compared to conventional payment systems, it offers a compelling vision of a possible future because the code describes both a regulatory and an economic system. So, think about what they are saying to you here in the context of what I have gone over. What a coincidence that Bitcoin and its infrastructure can be viewed as a new decentralized and automated financial system in the context of how they want to reshape the world, the powers that be, that is. What a coincidence that this comes out and is developed for, say, 13 years before we really get into the period of time where everything is starting to be reshaped and reorganized. There's all this momentum behind Bitcoin, coincidentally, as far as the artificially high price goes, which has made everyone more interested in it and has sort of built the momentum for this to be something that is considered an inevitability now by many people who talk about these sorts of things. In the context of all that, they are telling you that the blockchain will do to the financial system what the internet did to media. They're telling you it's going to be, if they get their way, if their plan succeeds, a complete revolution in the financial system. In the same way that media was revolutionized by the internet. And the people telling you this in 2017 were Joy Ito, who was getting funds from Jeffrey Epstein, and Neha Narula, who's sitting on the World Economic Forum's Global Blockchain Council. World Economic Forum announces Presidio principles as a foundation of blockchain ecosystem design. And then you have in this article from June of 2020, in its announcement, the World Economic Forum noted that blockchain technology is a pillar of the fourth industrial revolution, enabling new business and governance models that help enhance security, accountability, and transparency for people worldwide. Well, of course, that's how they sell it to you. But in the context of digital IDs, social credit scores, and how a blockchain would function or a distributed ledger would function in that environment, we know that they have something much different in mind than what they are saying here. But they're being honest in the sense of saying, hey, this technology is a pillar of our fourth industrial revolution, as we will refer to it in history books, you see. A lot of this is about how they will create their alibi in the history books when they write about all this. When they write about it, it'll just be this natural technological innovation that occurred. That was a wide variety of trends and innovation coming together organically. And sure, there were some leading figures that kind of steered it along, which of course are all their own leading figures. But it was a collaborative open source effort. I mean, even the code for the CBDC is allegedly open source. I mean, you can go look at it if you want to right now. That's how it will be sold. Similarly, this is an old page from archive.org, the Wayback Machine, where the World Economic Forum had Coinbase listed as a partner. Okay, tells you everything you need to know. And then this is tying in BlackRock here. In his latest letter to investors, the CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink, said the Ukrainian conflict has the potential to accelerate the development of digital currencies across the world. What a coincidence. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has put an end to the globalization we have experienced over the last 3 decades. As a result, a large-scale reorientation of supply chains will inherently be inflationary. The war will prompt countries to reevaluate their currency dependencies. Even before the war, several governments were looking to play a more active role in digital currencies and define the regulatory frameworks under which they operate. A global digital payment system, thoughtfully designed, can enhance the settlement of international transactions while reducing the risk of money laundering and corruption. Digital currencies can also help bring down costs of cross-border payments, for example, when expatriate workers send earnings back to their families. Well, there you go. The CEO of BlackRock, who, by the way, was chosen to implement the Federal Reserve pandemic bond program, the pandemic bailouts, this guy is telling you out in the open that the last 3 decades of globalization, that supply chain system, that currency exchange setup is over now based on this one conflict in Ukraine. And now, as a result, there will be a large-scale reorientation of supply chains. One more thing, did the NSA create Satoshi Nakamoto? I went into this in a video 5 years ago now, I think, in 2017, about the NSA and Satoshi Nakamoto. And there's just an interesting thing that I never mentioned back then, that Satoshi Nakamoto in Japanese can loosely translate to Central Intelligence because Satoshi is usually a name given for baby boys, which means clear thinking, quick-witted, wise. And Nakamoto is a Japanese surname, which means central origin, or one who lives in the middle. So you see how that can loosely be described as Central Intelligence. So, of course, they came right out and told you from the beginning, if you had the eyes to see it. But yeah, hopefully going over all of this, seeing the way that MIT created the Digital Currency Initiative, and then seeing how all the people affiliated with the Digital Currency Initiative then went on to create their own projects or go to work for Facebook, for example. And then looking at how the leaders of the Digital Currency Initiative are both connected into the power structure. First it was Joy Ito with Jeffrey Epstein, and then Neha Narula is involved with the World Economic Forum, and then she's directly not only involved in the World Economic Forum, but she's directly telling you what they envision blockchain doing to the financial system, and then she is actually heading up or heavily involved in the Boston Fed's research project that is ultimately going to design the CBDC for America, right? So you put all of these pieces together, and hopefully it is the proverbial nail in the coffin for these con artists who are out here promoting Bitcoin as if it was designed by some anonymous coder to save the world from financial tyranny. I mean, hopefully that has finally become just an absolutely laughable premise.